He paid just $1 for 100 acres of forgotten land. But when he arrived, the house was already claimed, by a young woman guarding secrets worth more than gold. What he uncovered wasn't just a battle over property. It was a fight for survival against ruthless men chasing a legacy. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. If you're into Wild West tales filled with danger and secrets, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. Now, saddle up and dive into the story. I remember the first time I saw the ranch. The heat had already settled into my shirt by mid-morning, and the road that led me there was more dust than gravel, winding between dry hills that seemed to stretch on forever. It felt unreal that something this big, 100 acres, a whole damn ranch, could change hands for the price of a cup of coffee. But the deed was in my pocket, signed and stamped, and my name sat on the page like it had been waiting for years to get there. I hadn't even planned to buy land. My whole life had been nothing but rented rooms and borrowed hope. But when the listing came up, and the seller said he'd take a single dollar if I signed today, something inside me shifted. Desperation? Curiosity? Maybe both. Either way, 3 hours later, I found myself standing at the edge of what should have been impossible. The fence was old, the kind of grey that only comes from years of standing against wind and rain. Beyond it, the grass rolled toward the horizon, and in the distance, a house waited. It sat there, leaning slightly to one side, roof patched with mismatched shingles, porch boards curled at the ends like a forgotten prayer. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like stepping into someone else's unfinished story. I parked my truck and took the deed out again, as if reading it one more time might make it feel real. The paper felt warm from my pocket, edges curling slightly. My name, the legal description, and that absurd price, $1. I ran my thumb over the signature of Boone Carter, the man who'd sold it to me with a handshake that lasted a moment too long and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. "Nobody's been up there in years," he'd said. "It'll all be yours." Yet the first sign that something was off wasn't a sound or a shape in a window. It was the feeling, that slow, creeping certainty that I wasn't alone. The porch groaned under my boots as I crossed it, the front door half open like it had been waiting too. When I pushed it wider, the smell hit me first. Dust, sun-baked wood, and something faintly floral. Lavender, maybe. Then, upstairs, the floor whispered. Soft, deliberate steps. Someone trying not to be heard. I froze, one hand still gripping the brass handle, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. The house was supposed to be empty. The seller had sworn it. Yet there it was, the undeniable sound of someone moving. Not a rat. Not the house settling. Someone. My heart hammered so loud I wondered if they could hear it too. I thought about leaving. Walking back to the truck. Driving until the ranch was nothing but a stupid story I never told. But instead, I took a step inside. The floor felt solid under my boots, though the boards creaked louder than they had any right to. Dust lay thick on every surface, but the air wasn't as stale as it should have been. Someone had been keeping the windows open, letting the place breathe. The footsteps upstairs stopped. For a moment, silence pressed so hard against my ears it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, at the top of the stairs, she appeared. Dark hair falling past her shoulders, wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. Not hiding, not armed, just there. And she didn't run, didn't scream. Her eyes met mine, steady as stone. And in that single look, everything changed. She looked at me like she'd been expecting this. Not me, exactly, but the moment itself. As if my arrival had always been part of the story, she'd been living alone in this house. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My tongue felt heavy in my mouth. But she did. Her voice was calm, quiet, almost resigned. And in that moment, standing there with sunlight cutting across the dusty floor between us, I realized that whatever I thought I'd bought for $1, this was something else entirely. For a moment, neither of us moved. Dust floated lazily through a shaft of sunlight that cut across the hallway, turning every breath into something visible. My pulse was loud in my ears, and yet her gaze never wavered. There was something unsettling about how calm she looked, standing at the top of the stairs like she'd already decided how this would end. I forced myself to speak, though my voice came out rough, scraped raw by surprise. I asked her name, and she gave it, quietly, almost like she didn't expect it to matter for long. Iris. Iris Quaid. A name that sounded like it belonged to another century. She told me she'd been here for 3 years, taking care of the place because she had nowhere else to go. Her words were steady, but the way her hand tightened around the banister told me there was more to it. I could feel the weight in her voice. Secrets, grief, and maybe a little bit of defiance. Enough to make a person stay on land that had already tried to forget them. I stepped further into the room, the old boards protesting under my boots. The smell of sun-baked dust mixed with something softer, lavender and maybe old paper. On the mantel above a cold fireplace, I noticed small details, things that shouldn't be in an abandoned house. A clean cup on the table. A folded blanket draped over a chair. Someone had been living here, not just hiding. She watched me with cautious eyes, but didn't run or ask me to leave. Instead, she spoke of the ranch as if it were alive, something that had kept her alive too. And part of me understood that. Land can do that. Give you something solid to hold on to when the rest of your life falls apart. Then she mentioned the real reason she couldn't leave. A deed, maps, and papers hidden somewhere in this dusty house. Her father's work. Evidence of a gold claim worth more than either of us could easily imagine. Her father had died for it, she said, and dangerous men had spent years hunting her to take it. Their greed, her fear, and the weight of a secret that could change everything. I listened, trying to process how in the hell I'd ended up here. 3 hours ago, I'd signed a paper for a $1 ranch. Now, I was standing face to face with a woman whose life was balanced on a truth hidden beneath the floorboards. And yet, even as she spoke, a part of me believed her. There was something in her eyes, a raw honesty that made it impossible to look away. It wasn't the look of someone running a con. It was the look of someone running out of places to run. Outside, the afternoon sun kept sliding down the sky, pulling shadows longer across the yard. The wind rattled a loose shutter somewhere upstairs, and for a moment, everything felt so normal it hurt. Like maybe this was just a chance meeting, nothing more. But the air was too heavy for that. She led me to the sitting room, near the fireplace. And as she lifted a floorboard with practiced care, I saw the leather pouch and rolled maps she'd spoken about. Her hands trembled as she unrolled them on the table, the yellowed paper covered in her father's neat handwriting and tiny symbols marking the veins of gold beneath some mountain slope. This was no rumor. It was proof. The kind of proof men might kill for. Looking at those maps, I understood why the ranch had cost me only $1. The seller hadn't mentioned Iris, because if he had, I never would have signed. And he'd have lost his chance to wash his hands of whatever trouble was coming. I asked her why she stayed. Why not run, burn the papers, and be free? Her answer stuck with me more than anything else. She said she couldn't run from what was hers, that the land had cost too much blood to simply walk away. And beneath her words, I could hear what she didn't say. She was tired of running, maybe even ready to fight. I wanted to say something that would make sense of all of this. But words felt useless. Instead, I asked her what she planned to do when the men came. because it was never a question of if. She looked at me, her dark eyes as heavy as the dusk outside, and said she didn't know. That she'd been waiting 3 years for an answer, and still didn't have one. Outside, the sun finally touched the hills, and the ranch turned gold and shadowed all at once. We stood there, two strangers bound by an accident of timing, looking at a treasure that felt more like a curse. And in that moment, the ranch stopped being just a cheap piece of land. It became something living, something that had chosen to keep a secret until it couldn't any more. I should have left, driven away before the dark brought whoever was hunting her. But I stayed. Maybe because of the fear in her voice when she spoke of them. Or maybe because I'd spent too many years wanting something that felt like mine. And even if it wasn't gold buried under these fields, there was something else here, something worth standing for. Night came fast in those parts, swallowing the horizon in minutes. We lit a single oil lamp, the glass soot from years of use, and the flame made the room feel smaller, but safer. We didn't speak much after that. The words had already been said. The truth was laid bare between us on that scarred wooden table. And in the quiet, I realized what had been bothering me since I set foot on the porch. The ranch didn't feel abandoned. It felt watched, as if the walls themselves were waiting for what came next. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside the thin walls felt louder. Every gust of wind might have been footsteps on the porch. And in the silence, my mind kept going back to her eyes, calm, tired, but unbroken, and to the gold hidden beneath paper and ink, a promise her father had died to protect. Sometime past midnight, I heard it. Horses, faint but steady, coming from the south trail. Slow at first, then quicker. The kind of sound that could mean nothing, or everything. I rose, careful not to make the floorboards squeal. Through the cracked glass of the window, I saw the glow of lanterns swinging with a rider's movement. Too many for travelers. Too deliberate for neighbors. They had found us. I turned, and in the lamplight, Iris was already awake, her eyes wide but clear. She'd heard them too. No panic. Just acceptance. Like she'd always known it would come to this. And in that quiet moment, with the weight of her father's legacy between us and danger closing in outside, I understood. This was no longer about a ranch I'd bought for $1. It had become something far greater, and far more dangerous, than I'd ever wanted. They say you can smell trouble before you see it. That night, standing in that broken-down house beside a woman I'd met only hours ago, I believed it. The air itself felt different, like the world had gone still to watch what came next. The sound of the riders carried through the night air, each hoofbeat sharp and deliberate. They weren't rushing, but they weren't wandering either. Men with a destination in mind. Men who knew what they were coming for. Iris didn't speak, and neither did I. Words felt useless now, thin things that couldn't hold back what was riding toward us. She crossed the room, lifted the edge of an old curtain, and peered out into the darkness. Her shoulders were rigid, every muscle strung tight like a bowstring. I could see the outline of her hand against the window frame, trembling just enough to betray the fear she'd been trying so hard to hide. I took a slow breath, trying to steady the shaking in my own chest. I'd come to this ranch looking for a piece of land, something simple and quiet to call my own. Instead, I'd found a woman carrying a secret that could buy an empire, or get us both buried before dawn. The horses drew closer, and I caught my first glimpse of them through the cracked glass. 4 riders, dark shapes against the pale dirt road, moving with a kind of grim purpose that made your blood run cold. No lanterns swinging wildly, no drunken laughter, just the steady, patient approach of men who'd hunted before. Iris turned from the window, her face pale in the lamplight. "They've found me," she whispered. There was no surprise in her voice, only exhaustion, like someone who'd been waiting for this knock on the door every night for years. "What do they want?" I asked, though I already knew. "The papers. The maps. Proof of a gold claim worth more than any honest man could earn in 10 lifetimes. They want what belonged to my father," she said, her voice tightening. "And they'll do anything to take it." I glanced at the bundle of papers still lying on the table. Yellowed, creased, but so obviously valuable now that it felt dangerous just to look at them. A treasure in ink and paper, and a death sentence for anyone caught holding it. "They'll search the house," I said quietly. "They'll tear it apart if they have to." "I know," she answered, her eyes locked on mine. And in that moment, I understood what she was asking without words. Would I stay? Would I risk my life for a woman I'd known less than a day and a treasure that wasn't mine? Before I could answer, the riders reached the yard. Their horses snorted and stamped at the dry earth, the leather of their saddles creaking in the quiet. One of the men swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud that seemed to echo inside my chest. Even from the window, I could see the shape of a revolver on his hip, his hand never far from it. The other riders spread out, forming a loose semicircle around the porch. Not charging in, just waiting, watching, like wolves circling a trapped deer. The first man stepped onto the porch, the boards bending under his weight. He raised a hand, knocking twice on the weathered door. The sound was calm, almost polite, but it was a threat all the same. The knock of someone who expected to be obeyed. Iris and I shared a look. Without speaking, she gathered the papers and tucked them back into the hidden space beneath the floorboard. She replaced the board, pressing it down until it lay flush with the others, her movements practiced and desperate. The knocking came again, harder this time. I walked to the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. My hand closed around the doorknob, slick with sweat despite the cool night air. I paused, just for a second, wondering what kind of fool opened the door to men like this. But then I turned the knob and pulled it open. The man standing on the porch wasn't old, but life had carved hard lines into his face. Dust clung to his coat, and his hat shadowed his eyes, making it hard to read them. But I didn't need to see his eyes to know what he was. Trouble wrapped in patience and steel. "Evening," he drawled, his voice as calm as still water. "Mighty late to be visiting, friend," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. He smiled at that, a slow, humorless curl of his lips. "We could say the same about you," he answered. "New owner of this place, I reckon?" I nodded. "Bought it this morning. Name's Nolan Cassidy." His eyes flicked past me, taking in the dim interior of the house, the single oil lamp casting long shadows on the walls. "Mind if we come in?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "My house," I said, the words tasting strange in my mouth. "And I don't recall inviting anyone tonight." For a heartbeat, the porch felt too small to hold us both. Then his hand settled lightly on the butt of his revolver. Not drawing, just reminding me it was there. "We're looking for someone," he said softly. "A young woman, goes by Iris Quaid. Seen her?" My chest tightened, but my voice didn't betray me. "Haven't seen anyone except the dust and the rats," I replied. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing," he said, "we tracked her horse to somewhere near here. And this house? Well, it's the only place for miles." Behind me, I could feel Iris holding her breath, the silence between us as loud as a gunshot. I kept my face still, my hands at my sides, though every muscle in my body felt ready to break and run. "I'm afraid you've wasted your ride," I told him. "Nobody here but me." He studied my face, searching for cracks in the lie. Then he glanced back at the men behind him, and for a moment I saw it. Doubt, or maybe calculation. A man deciding how much trouble was worth the prize. "We'll have a look around," he said, stepping closer. "Just to be sure." He pushed past me, his boots scraping on the warped boards of the porch. His companions followed, the weight of them pressing into the house like a gathering storm. Inside, the lamplight caught on metal as they spread out, eyes searching every corner, every shadow. The smell of sweat and road dust filled the air, mixing with the softer scent of lavender and old wood. Iris stepped forward then, out of the darkness, her chin lifted though her hands trembled. The leader's eyes lit up with recognition and satisfaction. "Well," he said softly, "looks like tonight wasn't a waste after all." And in that moment, the fragile hope I'd held on to, that maybe this was a misunderstanding, maybe they'd leave, shattered. This was real. This was happening. And neither of us could run any more. The room seemed to shrink around us, the lamplight flickering on rough faces and restless hands. Outside, the night held its breath. And in the hush before the storm, I understood. The ranch wasn't cursed by what it hid. It was cursed by the men willing to kill for it. The moment Iris stepped into the lamplight, the air in the room changed. It felt as if the walls themselves had drawn a breath, waiting for what would come next. The man who'd spoken at the door, whose voice had been almost polite, let that smile twist wider on his face, like a snake tasting the air. I stood there, every part of me screaming to move, to do something. But I didn't know what. My mind kept turning back to the absurdity of it. This morning I'd signed my name on a piece of paper, thinking I'd bought a ranch for $1. Now I stood in a room full of men who looked ready to kill for what lay hidden under a loose floorboard. Iris didn't flinch under their gaze, though I could see her knuckles whitening where she gripped the edge of the table. Her dress was simple, the color faded by sun and time, but it gave her a look of stubborn grace. The leader, Harper, though we didn't know his name then, took a step closer, the lamplight catching on the brass buckle of his gun belt. "Well now," he drawled, as if this were nothing more than a friendly visit. "You've saved us some time, Miss Quaid." His voice had a softness to it, but there was no kindness. It was the voice of a man who'd already decided how this night would end. I could feel sweat on my palms, and I forced myself to breathe. I remembered my father once telling me, "Real danger doesn't shout, it whispers." And in that quiet, I understood what he meant. These men didn't come in yelling, guns raised. They didn't need to. They believed the house, the night, even fate itself belonged to them. Harper's eyes flicked toward me. "Friend," he said, the word sharp as a hook, "you might want to step aside. What comes next doesn't concern you." I opened my mouth, but for a moment no words came. My throat felt dry, and the weight of what I was about to say pressed hard against my chest. "I bought this place this morning," I forced out. "If it's about land or deeds, it concerns me plenty." Harper laughed, short and cold. $1 for 100 acres, he said, shaking his head. Even a blind man would smell the rot in that deal. His eyes narrowed, the amusement slipping away. "What exactly did Carter tell you when he sold it?" The truth was Carter hadn't told me much. Just signed the papers quick, barely meeting my gaze. I realized too late that the real reason the land cost me $1 wasn't because it was worthless, but because it came with a secret men were willing to kill for. Harper turned back to Iris, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle. 3 years, he said softly. You've kept us chasing shadows. But the trail ends tonight. Iris didn't speak, but her eyes hardened. In them I saw years of running, of hiding, of nights like this one. And maybe, beneath it all, the faintest spark of defiance. A spark that terrified me as much as it gave me hope. The men spread out, boots scraping on the warped boards, shadows jumping on the walls like restless spirits. One man kept glancing toward the window, as if expecting someone to ride in and save us. But the yard outside lay empty under the cold eye of the moon. My thoughts raced, searching for anything that might buy us time. But Harper was already moving, stepping closer to Iris until only the width of the table separated them. "You know why we're here," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "Hand over the papers. You don't want this turning into something ugly." For a heartbeat, I thought she might do it, that she'd reach beneath the floor, give them what they wanted, and this nightmare would be over. But she didn't move. "It's my father's claim," she said, her voice quiet but unshaken. "He died for it. I won't hand it over to murderers." Harper's jaw tightened. "Think carefully, girl. A piece of paper isn't worth dying over." "It's worth more than my life," she replied. "It's the truth." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and fast in the stillness. Then Harper's hand dropped to his gun belt, not drawing, just resting there, a promise of what could come next. "I won't ask again," he said. Behind me, my mind screamed to stop this, to intervene. But fear held me still, my feet rooted to the boards. In that instant, I hated myself for it. Hated the way my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out thought. Iris took a breath, her shoulders rising. "Then don't ask," she whispered. For a moment, no one moved. The lamp flame flickered, shadows swaying like dancers around us. Then Harper's hand twitched, and something in the room shifted. Violence, waiting to be born. Before it could, a sound split the night, a distant thunder of hoofbeats. Not one horse, but many, pounding over dry earth, shaking the windows in their frames. Harper froze, head turning toward the door. His men shifted uneasily, hands tightening around rifle stocks. The sound grew louder, closer, until it filled the air like a coming storm. "What the hell?" one of them muttered. Through the window, I glimpsed shapes moving fast across the yard. More riders, lantern light catching on the silver flash of badges. The law had found us. Harper's mask slipped, and for the first time I saw fear. Not of us, but of something bigger, something he couldn't control. "Damn it," he hissed. The room exploded into motion. One man lunged for the window, peering into the night. Another turned, rifle half-raised. Harper's hand finally closed around the grip of his revolver. I found my voice, cracked and thin. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." He turned on me, rage burning in his eyes. "Shut your mouth," he snarled. "You think a few deputies change anything?" Outside, the hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. A voice rang out, calm and commanding. "House. This is Sheriff Bennett. Step outside. Nobody needs to get hurt." The name struck something in Harper. His eyes flicked to the door, to the window, calculating. "Bennett," he spat, as if the name tasted foul. He never knew when to stay out of other men's business. Iris stood her ground, silent and unmoving. The flame of defiance in her gaze burned brighter now, as if the nearness of help had rekindled hope. I wanted to reach for her hand, to promise it would be all right. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by the sight of Harper's finger twitching on the trigger. Outside, the sheriff's voice came again, harder this time. "Step out now, or we come in." And in that moment, the night itself seemed to hold its breath. Violence hung in the air like thunder waiting to break, and I understood that no matter who stepped through that door, law or outlaw, the quiet life I'd dreamed of when I bought this ranch had died the moment I crossed its threshold. What came next would write itself in blood and smoke. It's a strange thing, the moment you realize your life isn't really yours anymore. Standing in that dusty room, sweat running cold down my back, I felt it as clear as the smell of gun oil in the air. My fate was tangled with hers now. And neither of us had asked for it. Outside, Sheriff Bennett's voice rolled across the yard, calm but edged with steel. "Step outside, Wade Harper. Lay down your weapons. Nobody wants blood tonight." Harper's jaw clenched at the sound of his name. For a second, just a flicker, there was doubt in his eyes. Doubt that maybe, this time, the night wouldn't go his way. But it passed quick as a blink. His hand tightened on the revolver, and he shot me a look that froze my breath in my lungs. "You," he hissed, "step aside." I shook my head, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Can't do that." He took a half-step toward me, and the gun's barrel hovered inches from my chest. I could see the hammer, the tiny nicks on the blued steel, the wear of years in a man's hand. One twitch, and it would all be over before I could blink. Behind me, Iris moved. It was just a breath, a shift of weight, but Harper noticed. His eyes darted past me to her, and I saw the decision harden in him like wet cement turning to stone. Outside, the sheriff called again. "Don't force my hand, Harper. You know me. You know I'll do what I must." The riders out there shifted in the saddle, the leather creaking softly. I could picture them, lanterns casting long shadows, fingers tense on rifle stocks, hearts beating fast under the weight of what might come. But inside, the room felt too small to hold all that fear, too hot despite the cold night. The lamplight painted Harper's face in sharp lines, sweat shining on his brow, eyes narrowed to black slits. Iris spoke then, voice low but steady. "If you kill him," she said, "it won't save you. The sheriff won't leave until he finds me. And you'll still walk away with nothing." Harper's head snapped toward her, rage flaring in his eyes. "Quiet," he barked, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his control. But Iris didn't flinch. Her gaze met his, unwavering. "All this time," she said softly, "all this running, all this blood, because of something you were never going to keep." For a moment, I saw the truth of it land in Harper's eyes. Even if he got the papers, even if he killed us both, men like the Maddox brothers wouldn't let him keep the gold. He was a dog chasing a bone he'd never be allowed to chew. The thought must have burned like poison. His lip curled into a snarl, and he turned the gun back on me. "I said step aside," he growled. I didn't move. I don't know if it was courage or stupidity that kept my boots nailed to the boards, but all I could think was, if I move, she dies. If I stay, maybe there's still a chance. Then, before the moment could break, the door behind us rattled. A voice, hard, commanding, cut through the thick air. "Wade Harper, step back and drop your weapon." The sheriff himself had come to the porch. I couldn't see him, but I could hear the steady confidence in his voice. A man who'd faced men like Harper before and lived to tell it. Harper's eyes darted to the door, the calculation quick and brutal. His gun hand twitched, just enough to shift the barrel toward the sheriff. And that's when everything exploded. A gunshot roared through the room, so loud it left my ears ringing. I staggered back, blinded by the muzzle flash. The lamp wobbled, light jumping wildly across the walls. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd been hit. But then I saw Harper stumble, his gun hand jerking sideways. Smoke curled around us, acrid and stinging. Another shot cracked from the porch, then another, until it felt like the night itself was tearing apart. Harper's men fired back, glass shattering as bullets punched through the windows. The smell of burning powder choked the air, mixing with the dust kicked up by boots scrambling across the floor. In the chaos, I saw Iris drop to the ground, crawling toward the hearth where the floorboard hid her father's papers. Harper, rage twisting his face, lunged after her. Something in me snapped. I moved without thinking, my hand closing around the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. I swung it with everything I had, the weight pulling my shoulder near out of its socket. It caught Harper across the side, sending him crashing into the table. The lamp toppled, oil spilling, flame licking across the boards. For a second, the room became a hell of shadows and fire. Harper pushed himself up, blood trickling from a cut on his brow, eyes wild. His gun hand came up again, slower this time, but still deadly. Outside, boots thundered on the porch as the sheriff's men charged in, shouting commands. Then Iris, still on her knees, grabbed the fallen poker. Her movement was small but desperate, enough to throw Harper's aim off. His shot went wide, burying itself in the wall inches from my head. I didn't wait. I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. We crashed into the overturned table, splinters biting into my arms. His breath was hot against my face, the stench of sweat and rage filling my nose. We struggled in the flickering firelight, each breath a curse, each heartbeat a countdown to death. I felt his arm tense, trying to bring the revolver up again. My hand closed around his wrist, pushing it down, the metal cold and slick with sweat. Harper's face twisted, teeth bared in a snarl. "You should have stayed out of this," he spat. "Maybe," I gasped, "but it's my land now." The sheriff's men burst into the room, guns raised, shouts echoing. For a second, Harper froze. Just enough. I slammed his wrist against the floor, once, twice, until the revolver clattered free. One of the deputies kicked it aside, steel scraping against the boards. Harper sagged beneath me, the fight gone from his limbs, though hate still burned in his eyes like coals that wouldn't die. Hands grabbed my shoulders, pulling me back. The sheriff's voice cut through the noise. "Easy, son. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Smoke coiled through the room, flames licking up the spilled oil, crackling hungrily. The deputies stomped at it, but the boards were old, dry as tinder. And Iris, she was still kneeling by the hearth, hands trembling as she pulled free the oiled bundle of papers, clutching it to her chest like a dying prayer. I stumbled to her side, my breath ragged. "Come on," I rasped. "We've got to get out." She looked up, eyes shining in the flickering firelight, and for the first time I saw something other than fear in them. Relief. Maybe even hope. We rose together, the papers held tight between us, and stepped through the wreckage of what had been my living room. Behind us, Harper's men were dragged out, curses spilling from their lips. Harper himself was pinned by two deputies, blood on his brow, the hate in his eyes undimmed. The sheriff stood at the doorway, smoke swirling around him, his face carved from years of hard choices. Outside, the night felt colder, the sky wide and sharp with stars. But it smelled of gunpowder and burning wood, a reminder that nothing would ever be the same. We'd survived the night, but the secret Iris carried still hung between us, heavy as the promise of dawn. And in that quiet moment, breathing the scorched air of my new home, I knew this was only the beginning. Smoke hung heavy in the dawn air, curling up from the scorched boards and blackened beams. What had been my living room just hours before now looked like a ruin someone had stumbled across in the desert. Ash drifted across the floor, catching the first weak light of morning like grey snow. I remember standing there, boots sinking into warm ash, and thinking, I bought a ranch for $1, and now it's burned, broken, and bleeding secrets I never wanted to know. The sheriff moved through the wreckage with a slow, deliberate step of a man used to counting the cost of violence. His deputies gathered what was left of Harper's men outside, binding their wrists with rough rope. The look on those men's faces was something I won't forget. Hate swallowed by defeat, their eyes hollowed out by the knowledge they'd failed. And Harper himself, Wade Harper, sat on the ground, hands tied, blood drying on his temple. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. The hate in his eyes had cooled into something colder, quieter, a promise that this wasn't over. Iris stood beside me, the bundle of papers pressed tight against her chest. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and soot smudged her cheek, but she held herself straight, strong, alive. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The crackle of burning timbers and the low murmur of the deputies were the only sounds between us. Finally, the sheriff turned to us. Sheriff Bennett. His face was carved from years of sun and regret, whiskers turned grey, eyes sharp but tired. "You two all right?" he asked, voice gravelly. I nodded, but Iris answered. "We're alive. That's enough." Bennett glanced at the papers in her arms. So that's what this was all about. She didn't answer, and he didn't push. He just sighed, the weight of too many nights like this one pulling at his shoulders. "You understand," he said, looking at me now. "This isn't finished. Maddox brothers won't stop just because we hauled off their dogs." "I figured as much," I said. He studied me for a moment, as if weighing what kind of man he saw. "You're new to this land," he said. "New enough not to know what the Maddox name means around here." "I'm learning," I told him. His eyes softened a fraction. "Don't learn the hard way, son. Folks who cross them tend to vanish. And the law don't always stretch far enough to keep 'em safe." He turned to Iris. "You know better than anyone what they're capable of." "I know," she said quietly. Bennett nodded, as if that settled something only he understood. Then he stepped away, barking orders to his deputies to get the prisoners ready to ride. I stood there a while longer, staring at the wreckage. The table where I'd planned to eat my first meal in my new home was gone, splintered and blackened. The lamp that had lit the room now lay in pieces on the floor, glass glittering like frost. Funny how quickly a man's life could burn down to ash. Iris spoke softly beside me, voice ragged from smoke and fear. "I'm sorry," she said. "You bought this place for a new start. Instead you got my trouble." I turned to her, and for the first time really saw the weariness in her eyes, the years of running, hiding, lying awake at night listening for hoofbeats on the wind. "This was never about a house," I said. "I came out here because I thought land would give me something solid to stand on. But it seems what I really bought was a truth nobody else dared to hold." She swallowed, gripping the papers tighter. "You don't know what this means," she whispered. "If these get into the right hands, the Maddox brothers lose everything. But to get them there, it means more men like Harper will come. And next time, maybe we won't be so lucky." I looked at her, really looked, past the soot and the fear, and saw what those 3 years had cost her. Family, home, peace. And yet she'd held on to that claim, because it was hers, because it was her father's last gift, buried in blood and earth. "Iris," I said slowly, "why haven't you run farther? Why stay here, so close to them?" She looked down at the papers in her arms. "Because if I leave, this land stays in their hands. My father's claim, his maps. They're worthless if they're not filed in the county office. And to do that, someone has to stay. Someone has to stand here and say, 'This was ours, and you can't steal it.'" Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. I was waiting for the right moment, for someone to stand with me, even if I didn't know it. The words settled heavy in my chest. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Bennett came back, dusting off his coat. "We'll ride into town," he said. "I'll have to take statements, and I'll keep these men locked up as long as I can. But after that, be ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. "For them to come knocking again," he said. "And next time, they won't send Harper. They'll come themselves." He looked at Iris. "You should think hard about what to do with those papers. There's a judge in Redford who's still honest. But getting them to him, that's another matter." Iris nodded, lips pressed thin. As the sheriff's men led Harper and his gang away, the dawn finally broke over the hills. Light spilled across the burned boards, turning the ash silver. It should have felt like hope. Instead, it felt like a warning. I turned to Iris. "If we stay, they'll come. And if we run, we lose everything." She met my gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we can't run." I let out a slow breath. My hands still shook from the fight, the smell of smoke clinging to my clothes. "Then we fight," I said. The words surprised me, but once spoken, they felt right. Solid. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but something fiercer. "Together?" she asked. "Together," I answered. For the first time since I'd signed my name on that deed, I felt the ground steady under my feet. Not because of the land itself, but because of the choice we'd made. Bennett mounted his horse, looking down at us. "Whatever you decide, do it quick," he warned. "Maddox brothers don't wait long when they smell blood." Then he tipped his hat and rode out, his deputies trailing behind like shadows dissolving in the new day. Iris and I stood alone in the ruins, the papers that could change everything clutched in her hands. In that silence, the weight of it settled over us. The fight ahead, the men who'd come, and the land soaked with the memory of everything we stood to lose. Yet beneath it all, something else stirred, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this place could still become home. Not because it was safe, but because we'd chosen to stand and make it so. And as the first true light of morning touched the blackened boards, I realized that hope was worth fighting for. When the sheriff and his men finally disappeared down the trail, their silhouettes swallowed by dust and morning haze, the ranch fell into a quiet so heavy it felt alive. I remember standing there, boots sinking into blackened earth, staring at the ruined porch steps where just hours before, death had stood breathing inches from my face. Iris lowered herself onto what was left of a beam, the burnt edges still warm, and for a moment she just sat there, holding the bundle of papers against her chest like a wounded animal clutching its only defense. I didn't speak. Words felt too small against everything hanging between us. The smell of gunpowder, the fear of hoofbeats returning, and the raw memory of Harper's eyes as he pressed that gun barrel against my head. I walked the wreckage of the living room, stepping over shattered glass, burnt wood, and what was left of the life I'd imagined here. It struck me then how foolish it had been, thinking a single deed and $1 could buy me peace. Land isn't peace. Land is a promise you have to fight to keep. When I looked back at Iris, she was staring past me, lost somewhere far away. I'd seen that look before, on miners who survived cave-ins, on widows at gravesides. A look that says part of them still stands in the moment when everything burned. After a while, her voice rose, rough as gravel but steady. "You want to know why they're still chasing me? Why they won't ever stop?" I nodded, though I already knew part of it. The gold claim, the maps. But what she told me next went deeper. "My father," she began, voice trembling at first, "was a stubborn man, too stubborn for his own good. When he found the veins running deep into those hills, he swore it would lift us out of dirt and debt. But men like the Maddox brothers, they saw it too. They offered to buy in, promised protection, equipment, everything. My father said no." She swallowed, and for a heartbeat I saw the girl she'd once been, watching her world burn. One night, he didn't come home. They said it was an accident. The mine caved in. But the way folks talked, the look in their eyes. Even at 15, I knew what had really happened. I kept silent, letting her speak it out into the empty, smoky air. They came next for the claim, she went on. Showed up with forged papers, some judge in their pocket, and took everything. Our house, our horses, the land itself. All we had left were these papers my father hid. Proof the claim was ours. Proof of what really happened. She tightened her grip on the bundle, knuckles white. For 3 years, I've run from town to town. Every time I got close to filing these, they found me. Every time, someone paid to look the other way. And every time, I ended up back on the road, praying I'd stay ahead of them. Her voice cracked. Until now. The wind caught a curl of smoke from the ruins, carrying it into the sky. It smelled like endings, and beginnings. And you, she added, eyes locking onto mine, you're the first person who didn't tell me to run. You stood between me and a bullet. You don't even know me, and you stood there anyway. I felt her words land heavy inside me. Truth was, I didn't know why I'd done it. Maybe because I'd lost someone once, and no man should stand alone when the worst comes. Or maybe because the moment I saw Harper's gun turn toward her, my choice had already been made. I guess, I said slowly, some things are worth standing for, even if you don't know how it ends. She looked at me, really looked, as if trying to decide what kind of man I truly was. Whatever she saw, it softened something behind her eyes. We sat there, side by side on the burned remains of what had been my porch, while the sun climbed higher and the air warmed around us. The quiet wasn't comfortable, but it felt honest. Finally, I spoke. So what now? She hesitated. The papers have to be filed, she whispered. If they reach the judge in Redford, Maddox brothers lose everything. But Redford is 2 days' ride from here, and they'll know we're coming. She looked at the horizon, as if measuring the distance against her hope. If we leave together, they'll chase us both. If I go alone, I won't make it. And if you stay? I asked. They'll come, she said simply. And this time, they won't send men like Harper. They'll send men who shoot first. Silence stretched again. Somewhere out on the plains, a hawk cried, its shadow gliding over the scorched earth. In that quiet, my mind ran circles. The burned-out ranch that had once been my dream, the grave of a father's hope hidden in those papers, the men who would kill us both without blinking. And yet, something stubborn inside me wouldn't let go. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Or maybe it was the thought that this land, scarred as it was, could still be something more than just dirt and ashes. We make a plan, I said. Not just run. We do this on our terms. She turned to me, surprise flickering behind her exhaustion. What kind of plan? First, I said, we stop thinking like we're running. We think like we're the ones holding something they can't afford to lose. That gives us power, even if we don't feel it yet. She nodded, slowly, like a woman remembering what it felt like to believe. And second, I continued, we figure out how to get those papers to Redford. Maybe not together. Maybe I ride ahead, or you do. Maybe we send decoys, spread false trails. Her eyes sharpened, hope igniting behind the soot and fear. They'll watch the main road, she said. But there's an old trail through the canyon. Hard riding, but faster. Then that's part of it, I said. She drew a shaky breath, and for the first time, her voice held something other than resignation. If we do this, it has to be soon, before they regroup. Tonight, I agreed. At dusk. A plan was a fragile thing, but it was more than we'd had yesterday. It was a shape to our fear, a reason to move. We stood, brushing soot from our clothes. The ranch looked smaller now, stripped of walls and promise, but still ours. Still something worth fighting for. As we turned toward what was left of the barn, Iris paused. "Why you?" she asked softly. "You could ride away. Sell the land back. Start over somewhere else. Why stay?" I didn't answer at first. The truth felt too raw. That when Harper's gun pressed against my skull, I'd realized it wasn't just about land. It was about refusing to bend, about standing where a man chose to stand. "Finally," I said, "because if I walk away now, I'd never stop running. And neither would you." She looked at me a long time, then nodded once. "Then together," she said. "Together," I repeated. As the sun climbed higher, we stepped into the barn to gather what little we had left. 2 horses, a few supplies, and hope, fragile as glass, but sharp enough to cut through fear. Outside, the burned walls of my home smouldered in the morning breeze, whispering that everything we'd known was gone. But beyond that smoke lay Redford, and a chance to make it right. And for the first time, even knowing what waited on the trail, that felt like enough. Dusk fell like a slow tide, seeping into every crack of the burned ranch. By the time the last rays of sun caught on the blackened rafters, the air had turned sharp and cool. It felt as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. I'd spent the afternoon repairing tack and checking the horses, hands working on muscle memory, while my mind turned over every detail of our plan. It wasn't perfect. No plan ever is. But it was something. And sometimes, something is enough to keep a man's courage alive. Iris had been inside what was left of the barn, her figure framed by broken boards and smoke stains, wrapping the precious papers in oilcloth and cloth again, tying the bundle tight with leather cord. Watching her work, I saw how her hands trembled at first, then stilled, steadying like a heartbeat that finds its rhythm again. We decided to travel light. 1 pack each, food, water, a change of clothes, and the bundle of documents wrapped and hidden in the lining of Iris's saddlebag. Nothing more. The less we carried, the faster we could ride, and the better chance we had of slipping through the net Maddox brothers would surely cast. As the last of the daylight faded, we led the horses from the barn. The animals stamped and snorted in the cooling air, their breath curling like ghosts in the twilight. I remember the moment Iris and I paused at the edge of what had once been my porch, looking back at the ruins. Smoke still drifted from the blackened beams, and the wind tugged at loose boards, making them creak like bones. "This place deserved better," she murmured. "We both did," I answered. She didn't argue. Maybe because it was true. Or maybe because there wasn't time for regret anymore. We mounted in silence, the leather creaking under our weight. The horses shifted, impatient to move, as if they too felt the danger pressing down around us. Before we set off, Iris turned to me, her face lit only by the faint glow of the dying day. "Whatever happens out there," she said quietly, "thank you for not running." I held her gaze, the words catching in my throat. "We don't thank each other yet," I said. "Not until we make it to Redford." She nodded once, and we kicked the horses into motion. The trail out of the ranch was nothing more than 2 lines of flattened grass and dust, winding away into the hills. But Iris led us off it after a mile, turning into the narrow canyon trail she'd spoken of. The walls rose up on either side, stone rough as old scars, casting shadows that swallowed us whole. We rode without speaking for a long time. Hoofbeats echoed against the canyon walls, the rhythm oddly calming despite everything. The moon climbed, thin and pale, and its light turned the rocks silver. I found myself listening, not just for pursuit, but for every rustle of sage, every distant coyote call. The night felt alive, thick with unseen eyes. Each sound tested my resolve. The snap of a twig behind us, the flutter of a bird startled from its perch. I kept my hand close to the rifle strapped to my saddle, and each time I glanced at Iris, I saw the same tension in her shoulders, the same calculation behind her eyes. After a while, the canyon opened onto a high plateau. The wind met us there, cool and restless, tugging at hair and coat. The horses blew hard, flanks damp with sweat, but kept moving. They knew, same as we did, that stopping wasn't an option. We dismounted to rest briefly at a shallow creek, the water whispering over stones. Iris knelt, cupping water to her lips, and for a moment she seemed almost like the girl she must have been before all this. Hair loose, face pale in the moonlight, shoulders softened by exhaustion. "You ever think," I asked quietly, "what life would have been if your father had said yes to Maddox?" She lowered her hands, droplets falling back into the stream. "Every day," she whispered. "But then I remember, saying yes wouldn't have saved us. It would have bought us time. And in the end, they would have taken everything anyway." I nodded, though part of me still wished she'd never had to choose at all. "And you?" she asked. "Why come west? Why leave whatever you had behind?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at the creek, watching the water dance around stones, and answered honestly. Because what I had was already gone. My wife. The life we built together. One day it just ended, and I couldn't stand living in the grave of what used to be. So I came here, thinking land might give me something to belong to again. She studied me, her expression unreadable. "And has it?" I thought of the burned ranch, the gun barrel against my skull, the smell of smoke clinging to my clothes, and then of standing beside her when Harper came, choosing to stay. "Maybe," I said. "Not the way I thought. But maybe." She smiled faintly, and in that moment I saw a spark of hope that had been buried under fear for too long. We mounted again and rode on, the moon our only witness. The land rolled out around us. Dark ridges, scattered pines, dry creek beds silvered in moonlight. It felt endless, yet every mile brought us closer to Redford, and closer to danger. As the hours passed, fatigue gnawed at my bones. My legs burned from the saddle, my eyes stung from the dust. But each time I faltered, I thought of what we carried. Those papers weren't just ink on old parchment. They were a lifeline, not just for Iris, but maybe for me too. A chance to prove to myself that I could still fight for something. Around midnight, we crossed an old wagon road, the ruts so deep they'd catch a wheel and snap an axle. Iris pulled up suddenly, staring at the tracks. "Fresh," she whispered. "Riders. 3, maybe 4. My heart sank. "Maddox. Maybe," she said. "Or maybe someone else. But whoever they are, they're ahead of us now. A choice lay before us. Turn back and find another way, or press on, risking riding straight into them." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the wind through the grass. "We can't turn back," I said finally. "If they're headed to Redford too, it means they know. And if they get there first." She didn't argue. Instead, she squared her shoulders, and I saw the quiet steel in her eyes. "Then we ride faster," she said. We nudged the horses into a canter, the pounding of hooves shaking through my bones. Dust rose behind us, moonlit like a ghost trail. The night swallowed our breath, our fear, our whispered prayers. Somewhere ahead, men who would kill us without hesitation rode toward the same goal. And behind us, the memory of burned wood and smoke pressed us onward. But in that moment, side by side under the pale wash of moonlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope, exactly, but purpose. A reason to keep going, mile after mile, even when every muscle ached and every heartbeat sounded like a countdown. We rode into the darkness together, two strangers bound by burned earth, broken dreams, and the stubborn refusal to give up. And though dawn was still hours away, I dared to believe we might live to see it. Night had a way of making every shadow look like an ambush waiting to happen. Our horses moved cautiously now, ears flicking at each rustle in the sagebrush. The air felt heavy, almost sticky, like it carried secrets we weren't meant to hear. Hours of riding had turned my legs stiff as fence posts and my back into a knot of pain. I knew Iris was hurting too, though she never complained. Every so often, she'd touch the saddlebag to be sure the documents were still there, like a talisman against the fear pressing in around us. We thought we had put enough distance between us and the men chasing us. But fear has a way of making distance feel meaningless. Each mile gained felt stolen, borrowed time that could be taken back with one gunshot in the dark. Somewhere near a dry wash, the horses suddenly balked, snorting and stepping sideways. My hand went to my rifle before I even saw what spooked them. Ahead, half hidden by moonlight, was an old campsite, cold ashes, a few boot prints, and something worse. Fresh hoof tracks heading north, the same direction we were riding. "They're closer than we thought," Iris breathed, her voice barely louder than the wind. The words sank like a stone in my gut. If we kept going, we might ride right into them. But turning back wasn't an option, not with Redford and hope lying ahead. For the first time, doubt clawed at me. My mind replayed every choice that led us here. Buying the ranch, staying when I should have run, believing I could protect a woman hunted by men far crueler than I'd ever known. Iris must have seen it on my face. "It's too late to wonder now," she whispered. "We ride forward. That's all we can do." And so we did, into a darkness that felt thick as grief. The wind cut sharp against my skin, and the night seemed endless, like a road with no promise of dawn. Yet, even with fear gnawing at us, we kept riding, because sometimes hope isn't loud or bright. Sometimes it's just two tired riders pressing on into the night, refusing to let go of the one thing they have left, each other. The first gunshot cracked like a whip through the night, sharp and unforgiving. My heart slammed against my ribs as the world exploded into chaos. Shadows flickered wildly between the rocks and sagebrush, and horses reared, nostrils flaring with panic. I grabbed my rifle, hands steady despite the storm raging inside. Iris pulled her own weapon from beneath her coat, eyes fierce and unyielding. There was no time for fear now, only survival. Around us, voices barked orders, heavy boots thudded against the cracked earth, and the stench of sweat and gunpowder filled the air. The Maddox men had caught up. No subtlety, no warning, just pure, brutal force. They wanted those papers, that claim, and they'd burn everything down if they had to. Bullets tore through the night, ricocheting off rocks, kicking up dirt at our feet. I caught a glimpse of Wade Harper, his face twisted in rage, stalking through the melee like a predator hungry for blood. But we weren't ready to give up. We ducked behind boulders, moving in sync, protecting the bundle like it was the last thread tying us to hope. I saw Iris's jaw clenched tight, every inch of her soaked with adrenaline and resolve. For a moment, time slowed. The world was nothing but the pounding of hooves, the sharp reports of gunfire, and the unbreakable will to survive. I realized then that this wasn't just about land or gold. It was about reclaiming our lives, rewriting a story that fate tried to steal from us. As the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, bleeding pink and gold into the sky, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, we would fight to the very end. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the battered land. The night's violence had left its mark. Spent shells glittered on the ground, Horses pawed anxiously, and the air hung heavy with the smell of smoke and sweat. I stood beside Iris amid the wreckage, heart still pounding, hands bruised but steady. The Maddox men had fled, their threats and bullets scattered with the retreating dust, but the battle was far from over. She pulled the worn bundle from her saddlebag, untying the leather cords with fingers still trembling. The original deed and survey maps lay before us, their faded ink a lifeline to reclaiming what was ours. I watched her eyes, fierce and haunted, and felt a swell of something I hadn't dared hope for. Relief, maybe, or the quiet power of justice waiting to be claimed. We both knew the road ahead would be difficult. Legal battles, crooked men, and old wounds still waited like ghosts in the shadows. But for the first time, we had proof. The truth was in our hands, sharp and undeniable. Iris looked up at me, voice soft but certain. This land, it's more than property. It's memory, family, survival. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in my bones. And now it's ours to protect. We mounted our horses slowly, the rising sun warming our backs. The ranch, scarred but standing, stretched out before us like a promise. Whatever the Maddox brothers or their cronies threw at us next, we wouldn't back down. Because this place, these papers, this fight, it was more than a battle for land. It was the reclaiming of our lives, piece by piece. And as we rode toward Redford to begin the next fight, the one that would finally set us free, I realized that sometimes the most valuable treasure isn't gold or deeds, but the strength to stand and fight for what's rightfully yours. This was just the beginning. If you were in his boots, would you fight the same fight? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video if this story moved you. Before you go, explore the videos on your screen. More Wild West tales await. Stay sharp, and see you in the next ride.